Hi there! Welcome to Boy Meets Quilt. I'm Andrew Vay Hansen, and this is my next video in my virtual trunk show. We're nearing the end. I only have a couple more after this because I need to actually get working and finish up some more quilts. But I've been very lazy these last few months. Anyway, the quilt behind me is one of my more recent quilts. I finished this about a year ago. And I made this quilt to be displayed in what was supposed to be the Brooklyn Quilters Guild 2020 quilt show, which we put on a quilt show every 2 years. But of course, the pandemic hit, and we were put in lockdown right when the quilt show was supposed to happen. So this quilt has just been in my apartment for a year, not seen by anyone really. But that's all right. I like looking at it. I really love this quilt. It's pretty much all improv pieced as far as these individual blocks go. And what I decided to do when I was thinking of the quilt that I wanted to make in order to display for the quilt show was I wanted a Brooklyn themed quilt. It's the Brooklyn Quilters Guild. We were planning on doing our show in Industry City, which is where we did our last show, which just has a very Brooklyn vibe to it. And so I wanted to contribute to that vibe with my quilt. And so I started sketching out some ideas, and I'm not a big sketcher, but I really wanted to use sketching as a way to formulate my ideas, but then also as a way to crop them down, because ultimately I didn't want my blocks to necessarily be recognizable at first glance. Although I will say some of these blocks are clearly more concrete and less abstract. But some of these blocks, I have a feeling you would never guess where the actual inspiration came from. And I would sketch out the full idea of what I wanted, things that you would see around Brooklyn or New York City. And so I would sketch out, say, a lamppost, or I would sketch out a brownstone. And then once I would sketch those out, I would start to think about how I could crop them so that they're more abstract. And so I started making the blocks. I did a lot of prototyping with scrap fabric before I used my real fabric, because I really didn't know how this was going to go, and I wanted to go through some of the ideas that I'd come up with and actually crop them physically with my rotary cutter and my rulers to see what the actual squares would look like. I'm glad I did that because I learned a lot while I was doing those prototype blocks. But then at a certain point, you know, I was making prototype blocks. I hadn't made all of my prototypes of all the blocks I wanted to put in the quilt, but I was getting bored. And I don't know about you, but I can only experiment so much before I want to just dive into the real fabric and just put the quilt together. And so that's what I decided on the colors that I wanted to use. I went to the store, I bought my fabric, and I just started cutting into it. And that actually motivated me to actually start really working on the quilt. You know, when I was just doing the prototypes, it was taking weeks and weeks for me to just get through a few prototypes, because I just wasn't into it. Like, once I really started on the quilt, I kind of finished it within 2 weeks, because I was just so excited to actually work on the real stuff. So that's how I came up with all these blocks, and then it was a process throughout about how I wanted to actually display the blocks, how I wanted the overall design to look. And so I hadn't originally thought I would do a frame of this, what is actually, it kind of looks yellow, I think, in this video, but depending on the light, it's a bit of a chartreuse. It's got a little bit of green in it, and so I wasn't originally planning on framing my blocks with this chartreuse, but then I realized I needed something. I wanted my little moments of chartreuse in the blocks to have another reference around them. So I ended up framing them all, and then I realized I wanted something, like it was too much, like the chartreuse, it ended up being too much in the overall quilt. So I needed something else to kind of pare back on that bright yellow-green. And so I decided to do a shadow with the black. It gives a little more dimensionality to the overall design, and it helps break up the chartreuse that's throughout. And so I call this quilt BK Snaps. BK is an abbreviation we use to represent Brooklyn. So here's a view of the full quilt hanging in my kitchen because I needed some space to see the full quilt. And let's move in and look at some of these details. So here we have the top left block. It's a B. This wasn't so much improv pieced. I sketched this out on graph paper and figured out exactly how I wanted it to look and then cut it out accordingly. Basically would just echo. I'm just echoing each of the neutral background spaces of the block. So here we have our next block. This represents a handlebar. Could be the handlebar of a bike, could be the handlebar of a scooter. We see all of them all over the place in New York. This represents a bit of the Cyclone, the first roller coaster in the United States, here in Coney Island, Brooklyn. It's still standing. I've ridden it a few times. It's very exciting. This block represents a ship here in the Navy Yard. I just live a couple blocks away from the Brooklyn Navy Yards, and actually the building I live in was built to house many of the workers who worked in the Navy Yard during that time period. Then we come down here, and this is just a skyline shot. This is the skyline you might see of Manhattan that you might see when you're looking at it from Brooklyn across the river, the East River. And then here we just have a brick wall. So I created a brick wall and then put it on top of another brick wall of the background of the quilt. I really love how this turns out. I love how geometric it is. It was a pain in the butt to sew because those are some really thin seams there, some really tiny seams in between the bricks. This is a very abstract crop view of a sidewalk. So you have the sidewalk here with the cracks and then the street in the black. And this is one of the many ubiquitous rooftop water towers that we have here in New York. This is super abstract. Even I don't really see what my original inspiration was, but it's supposed to be a wave crashing on Coney Island Beach. And then here we have a fire hydrant. You can see the different parts of the fire hydrant that have been cropped. Don't park in front of a fire hydrant. They take that very seriously here. You will get ticketed and towed. This is a dog collar. We have a dog collar with a little ID tag here. And especially here in Brooklyn, people love their dogs. And this is an abstract rendering of the promenade here in Brooklyn. It's in Brooklyn Heights. It's a beautiful lookout area where you can see the downtown skyline of Manhattan, and it's gorgeous. You can also see the Statue of Liberty and all sorts of beautiful sights from the promenade. Then we come down, and this is just a building, just any sort of skyrise, apartment building, even maybe a brownstone with one window that is lit up. Here we have a prayer gate that you can see in the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, in their Japanese garden. The Brooklyn Botanical Garden is my favorite spots in the city. When I first moved to Brooklyn, I lived right across the street from the garden, and I would go all the time. They have a cherry blossom festival every year that is just stunning, and I love their Japanese garden. And so this is the prayer gate that they have in the pond. Here we have the Brooklyn Bridge, just a cropped version of it. This one is a tongue-in-cheek little funny block because this was inspired by a cockroach. So you have just the tip of the head with the antenna coming out. All right, and then here we have a bike wheel. Again, similar to that handlebar up there, bikes are everywhere, especially in Brooklyn. Brooklyners love to bike. Then here, this is more abstract, but it's based on, these are two subway cars, and then these are the coils that connect the cars of the train. This is another little bit of a tongue-in-cheek funny block because this is a hipster. You have this like almost handlebar mustache and these thick-rimmed glasses. And that's kind of a Brooklyn hipster uniform. And then here, down here, to match with the B up in the top left corner, we have the K in the bottom right corner. So it's BK Snaps. Snaps meaning snapshots. So all of these blocks represent snapshots that you would take throughout Brooklyn and then crop them however you like. Now let's take a look at the back of the quilt because I actually love how the back turned out. And this is the back of BK Snaps. And I really love the back of the quilt. I am not normally someone who does a pieced backing for my quilts because I just don't have the patience. This was, you know, that phrase, necessity is the mother of invention. I didn't have enough of fabric to create a full back without piecing it. So I used the scraps that I had left. I had these big chunks of well, it's actually called pear, the color, the yellow-green color. I had big chunks of that, but just not enough, not quite enough to do the full back. So I was able to use them for most of the back, and then I just took the scraps of my gray and black to make this geometric design in the middle. So I love how geometric it looks. I would actually be interested in this as a front of a quilt design. Very simple, very clean looking. But what I really like about this is that the front of the quilt already has a bit of a comic book quality, which you will notice many of my quilts end up having that quality because I have read many, many comic books in my life, both as a child and an adult. But I really think that comic book quality really comes through here in the back. Just the way the style of my free motion quilting is very kind of like sketchy, rough hand drawn. That's kind of the style that I have. You can see how I quilted in just in the background shapes, which allows the abstract shapes of the blocks to come through. And I think it's pretty cool. And so that's BK Snaps. I hope you enjoyed this virtual trunk show of this quilt. I just have a couple more of these trunk show videos left, so please be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on them. And I need to figure out what to do next once I'm done with those, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you're all out there making and crafting and doing what brings you joy and brings you closer to the community. It's much needed right now. And always feel free to leave comments, questions, advice in the comment section below. And thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.